Hello, everyone. I'm Brother Joachim Joseph. I'm a Franciscan friar of the Renewal. I wish we could be together, but these are the times that we live in with this pandemic. Maybe next time we'll actually be able to be together for this. I'm so grateful to be with you. The organizers of your retreat asked me to just give a little testimony about my life and the ways I come to know Christ. So here it goes. My name is Brother Joachim Joseph. I grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts, so I love everything Boston, the Red Sox, the Celtics, the Patriots, the Bruins. If you don't like it, it's okay. Not everyone can be perfect, but we should all strive for that. So growing up in Massachusetts, I grew up kind of your typical Northeast life. My mom was a real devout woman. My dad was not. My mom would go to church all the time, especially always on Sundays, right? And my dad would never, ever go to church. I don't know if any of you grow up like that. And I remember being a kid and being forced to go to Mass and asking, I want to stay home. Let me stay home with Dad. No, you can't stay home with your father. You got to go to church. I'd go to Dad. Dad, come on, let me stay home with you. Work on a car, go fishing. No, go to church with your mom. And just always being upset. I even went to Catholic school. I was taught by the Sisters of No Mercy. It's a joke. The Sisters of Mercy. And they were pretty good. I mean, they tried. But I was a tough kid, and I didn't really listen. I actually got kicked out of Catholic school. I got kicked out of Catholic school in my second year of sixth grade. Yes, that's right. 2 years of sixth grade. I liked it so much I did it twice. So in sixth grade, I did a lot of stuff. I just started getting really bad. I got into a lot of fights. Give you a quick little story of some of the little bit of trouble I got into. I'm not going to give you the full details because I've already got to confession. You don't need to know. But one day, Sister Gil Mary, we used to call her Sister Blueberry because, well, she was bigger than me and even shorter than me. And she wore a blue habit of the nun, right? So she looked like a blueberry, right? So Sister Blueberry was up writing on the chalkboard saying something, like blah, 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 right? And I had just gotten my first set of house keys. Do you remember getting your first set of house keys? I remember because that's when you become a man, right? I got this first set of house keys, and I didn't need my brother, my sister, my mom or my dad to let me in or out of the house. I could come and go as I wanted, as long as I was home by the streetlights, right? So I got this set of keys, and I'm looking at them, and we had two keys, one for the top lock, one for the bottom lock. And I'm looking at these keys, and they're just so perfect, so precious, right? And I look over at the wall, and I notice at the wall beside me, there's a thing that looks so tempting. It's called an outlet. So I'm looking at this outlet, and I'm looking at my keys, and there's two holes, and there's two keys. And I'm thinking, why not? Now, I'm not a complete idiot. I didn't just shove my keys right into this outlet because I didn't want to be a friar at a very young age. So I went, and I took these keys, and I put them under my arm like this, and I crouched down real low, and I got the keys, and I got them closer and closer and closer to the outlet, and just getting so close, and then pop! And black smoke starts coming out of the wall, and I pull my keys away, and I put them in my pocket, and I'm waving away the smoke that's coming out of the wall, and thanks be to God, the school didn't catch on fire, and everything kind of calms down. And I look around, and nobody noticed anything. Everybody was completely asleep in class. I don't know if you ever had that experience. Everyone's asleep in class, and I look up, and above Sister Gil Mary's head, a miracle had happened. Time had stopped. The clock stopped ticking. And so, being the good, responsible student I was, I raised my hand. I said, Sister Gil Mary, I said, the clock stopped. How will we know when class is over? And Sister Gil Mary, at like age 80, 85, went down 3 flights of stairs, changed the fuse in the circuit box, walked all the way back up those stairs at like 320 pounds, and notices that the clock was moving again, and Sister Gil Mary just went back to work. And so I pulled my keys back out and pop! I said, Gilberry, down the flight, back up. I did that about 6 times that day. It was a great day. It was a lot of fun. And I became inspired at that moment. I knew what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. See, Sister Gilmary lost about 30 pounds in one day, and I knew I should be a personal trainer. And instead of feeding this desire of mine, the school kicked me out. It dashed all my dreams at once. So now I'm a friar. No, that's not the full story. That's not the full story. Don't worry, there is more. So I did get kicked out of Catholic school. I went to public school. And in public school, early on, I'd already been getting in a lot of trouble before. I already had started drinking. My dad was a functional alcoholic growing up. So I was already getting into his alcohol and stuff like that. And here I am in 7th grade. I'm in school at a Say No to Drugs rally. And that's when I purchased my first joint of marijuana. So that's kind of just how my life went. I was getting into a lot of trouble, and yet still going to Mass every Sunday. For those of you who are young out there watching this, you may be thinking, yeah, that sounds a little bit like what I do. I'm forced to go to Mass, I go, but I still get into my little bits of trouble, right? So fast forward to about 15 years old. That's when I'm making my confirmation. And something else that year happened that really hurt. My grandmother passed away. And for the first time in my life, I experienced loss. I experienced that kind of suffering. And my grandmother was a really holy woman, Portuguese woman, just really devout, prayed the rosary all the time, always at church. And when she died, I remember being really angry with God because I thought to myself, in my selfishness, why would you take her? You know, she's the only good person here. Not thinking to myself, like, this is what she has been living for, to go live for all eternity with you, Lord, right? So I got upset with God. I made my confirmation, and I stopped going to church. My parents that year made another major decision. They decided to move to Florida. It was my junior year in high school, and here I am going from Massachusetts to Florida. I had to learn to speak English all over again because I didn't pronounce R's, and nobody understood what I said. When I said, hey, who wants to potty? They thought I meant, like, go to the bathroom, and I was talking about a party, right? So I had to learn how to speak English all over again. It was crazy. I listened to country music for the first time in my life. I did years off of purgatory just by listening to country music. I grew up with hip-hop, so that's kind of my first love. So I get down to Florida, living down there, loving it, loving the beaches, loving the weather, not loving school so much, but going, and I finished a year there. They made me go to summer school, and they had me do some night classes because my credits were behind from Massachusetts to Florida. And I go in my senior year, and they tell me, well, you're going to have to do another year because there are classes you took in Massachusetts that you don't need to take down here, but we have classes that you didn't take up there that you need to take. So I was really upset with that. I went back to my guidance counselor the next day, and I said, look, man, I don't know about this. I'm thinking about dropping out. I really don't know what to do. And he said, just hurry up, make up your mind, I'll fill out the paperwork. And so somehow his desk ended up flipped over on him. I don't know what happened, but something happened like that. And I just left, and I never went back. I ended up eventually getting my GED, thanks to my godparents. They signed me up to go get my GED. I did eventually go to college, which I dropped out from that as well. Are you getting a trend here? I wasn't doing the best. I got a job working road construction in Florida, kind of definitely working hard, but partying harder at night and on the weekends. One day while I was working, there's something that happens in Florida, happens in the Northeast. It doesn't happen in other parts of the country, so I may have to describe it a little bit. It's something called fog. Right? If you're living in the desert, if you're down in Arizona, you're down in New Mexico, you don't really know fog. Fog is dense. It's almost like the clouds just cover the earth. And I was in Florida, I'm working road construction, and I'm definitely hungover that day. And I'm working, and I got to get to the other side of the street. The other side of the street is a highway. So I'm watching, looking through the fog, looking at cars, and they're kind of just zipping by. And I look over here and I see, okay, there's one car, and then it's one of our big front end loaders. Those are the things with the tires that are bigger than me. They got the big bucket on it. And I was like, all right, after that car comes, I got enough time. I can make it at least halfway across. And I'm watching over here, and this car zooms by. And so once this car went by, I knew I was good. And I took a step out, and boom! I was hit by a Buick Regal. It was tucked in behind the other car. I went 45 feet through the air, not high, but in distance. I was about 10 feet high. I was spinning like it was a kung fu movie, and I was doing a super kick. And the whole time I was spinning in the air, all I could think of was it had to be our front end loader. That's the only vehicle I saw. And I knew if the front end loader had hit me at that speed, that my legs were probably chopped off. And that's what I'm thinking of in the air. I never lost consciousness. Finally, I land on my knees on the asphalt, and that's exactly what I needed. I needed to be brought to my knees. I've been living a crazy life, and God had to bring me to my knees, force me to my knees. After I hit my knees, my face goes next, and then I roll. And I roll next to this guy. I was working with this guy named Luis. He was a good friend. And when Luis tells the story, he says, I heard this big bang, and I looked over, and I saw this bird, and I thought, wow, that's a big bird. And then I hit the ground, and I rolled to Luis, and he tried to talk to me, see if I was okay, but the wind was knocked out of me. As the wind was knocked out of me, and I couldn't breathe, I was thinking only one thing: I'm going to hell. I knew without a shadow of a doubt I was going to hell, and it was what I deserved. I had gone to Catholic school, I had been confirmed, and I never once thought to ask for mercy. I never thought to call on the Lord's name. I just knew I was going to hell. As I was laying there, I started thinking, I can't go to hell. I can't go to hell. I can't go to hell. Finally, the wind came back to me, and I laid there, and my godfather who I worked with came over, and other guys came around me, and they were checking on me, and the guy who hit me got out of his car, and he says, I was only going 20 miles an hour, I was only going 20 miles. And I tried to get up and fight the guy, and all the guys working with me, holding me back. And then ambulance shows up, and they said to me, what happened? And I said, I've fallen, and I can't get up. I still had my sense of humor. Thanks be to God for that. As I lay there, I saw the blood dripping from my nose. I didn't know where my legs were. They were on, don't worry, they were still on. But I didn't know full extent of what had happened. I didn't know if I could walk. The only thing I could think of was, how am I going to be able to go to the club tonight and pick up girls? I was so vain. My mind was so out of touch with the reality at this point in my life. I go to the hospital, and thanks be to God, there was no major injuries. I got a pretty good cut on my arm. My muscles and tendons were all sliced in half. But nothing life-threatening, thanks be to God. I remember my mom came into my hospital room, and she said, your guardian angel is watching over you. And that's the only thing that made sense to me. You don't get hit by a car, go 45 feet through the air, and live. I did. Not only that, I didn't even break a bone. God is merciful. So coming out of the hospital, my mom had called all my family and told them my arm was dangling off. She's Portuguese, she exaggerates. It's what moms do, right? So my brother came in from the Navy, and with him coming in, I was like, bro, don't bother, I'm fine. He's like, no, I'm coming. So he takes time off, he flies over to see me. He sees me. He's like, "Oh, dude, you're fine." I was like, "I told you." So he's like, "Well, you want to go get a movie?" I was like, "Yeah." And so we went to Blockbuster. Now, for those of you who are younger, there was this thing once upon a time called Blockbuster Video, and it was important in the United States. There's these things called VHS tapes. I know it's hard to believe. It wasn't even DVD. It wasn't downloadable. You actually had to go to a store, get a movie, bring it back, play it, and then be kind, rewind it. You had to rewind it back. It took about 20 minutes and bring it back to the store, right? So I go to Blockbuster Video with my brother. We get a video, and now I've got road rash all over my face, all over my body. I'm a mess. I look a mess, and I'm not remembering this, right? And so I go in and come out of the store, and as we're getting into the car, this woman pulls up, and she gets out of the car, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, honey, what happened to you?" And I looked at her, and I said, "Look, in about 2 weeks, I'm going to be fine, but you're still going to be fat, old, and ugly." And my brother goes, "What the heck is wrong with you?" And I was like, "What? She said something to me, I said something back." I was so stupid. I was so rude. I never thought about anybody else's feelings. She was sympathetic. She was sympathetic toward me because, well, she could see something happened to me. She said, "What happened to you?" Me, I was an idiot. I said, "You're fat, old, and ugly." What kind of response is that? It's terrible. Don't ever do that. If you're like me, stop. Change your life. Come to Jesus. Let this be the moment right now. So I get better. As I'm getting better, I had gone to church. I started going back to church, but I wasn't doing something that was very important when you go to church. I wasn't listening. I wasn't praying. Sure, I said the prayers at Mass. I knew those. We all know those by heart, right? But I wasn't praying. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't talking to God. I was just saying something that I had memorized. And so my life at that time, I wasn't ready still. Even though I got hit by a car, I wasn't ready for the impact of who God is. So as I started getting better, I stopped going to church. So my life kind of goes on. I'm living my life. I'm working construction. I'm doing all my stuff. And my brother, who had come down to see me, my brother, who, as we got older, we became best friends, really. We're 7 years different in age. Growing up, we fought all the time. But as we got older, we grew close. Well, my brother was sick. I would go visit him every Christmas. My brother was HIV positive at the time. And I remember visiting him one Christmas in particular when he was really starting to get skinny at this point. And he told me something that shook me. He said, "I just want to let you know, I feel God and Satan, they're fighting for my soul." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Yeah." He says, I chose God. I just wanted to let you know that." And I was like, Good? Yeah, because God is good, or at least better than the devil, right? And my brother could tell I wasn't comfortable with this conversation, so he kind of just ended it. And we kind of went on our way, and I went back down to Florida after Christmas. And a few more months later, my brother was starting to really, really get sick. And he asked me to come back and to move him to Massachusetts. He wanted to move into my sister's house for the final year or months of his life. And so I did. I moved my brother back to Massachusetts. Once I got him there, I came back down to Florida. And it didn't take long. My brother's health started slipping. He stopped taking his medicine. I remember being on the phone with him one night in particular when it was getting really, really close. And it took my brother 15 minutes to say 3 words. You see, when people are dying often with complications to AIDS, one of the things that they get is hiccups really bad. So bad, they've lost so much weight that it just hurts every bone, every muscle in their body. And it took my brother 15 minutes to simply say, I love you. I told him I loved him too. I hung up the phone. I wept. And for the first time in my life, I prayed. I said, God, just take him. Take him. He's suffered enough. It was hard to say that prayer. Because remember, when my grandmother died, I was angry because he took her in her suffering. But this time I understood a little bit more about life. The next day I went to work. I came home and my godmother was waiting outside of my house for me, and I knew what that meant. My brother had died that night. So I flew up to Massachusetts right away, got on a plane. From the plane, got a car and went directly to the funeral home where the wake was taking place. My sister handed me an envelope, and in that envelope there was a letter from my brother, and there's a whole lot of things in that letter, but I just want to touch on a few points. My brother told me, he said, being a man is not what we were taught when we were growing up. Being a man isn't about how much weight you can lift. It's not about how much booze you could drink. It's not about how much drugs you can do. And it's not about how many women you can sleep with. Being a man is knowing God in your heart and knowing who you are before him. These words impacted me deeply. Little did I know it, but this was actually a prayer that St. Francis used to pray all the time. He used to say, who are you, Lord, and who am I? Who are you, Lord, and who am I? After the funeral, I went back down to Florida, and I started to change some things in my life. I started to go back to church, number one, and I stopped going out to the clubs, at least on Saturday nights. I still went a couple of other times a week, but Saturday nights I didn't go because I didn't want to go to church Sunday morning with a hangover. I know it's a little bit odd, but that was my reasoning back then. I didn't want to hear the organ with a hangover. Well, I'm hanging out with my friends one day and making plans for the weekend, and one of them said, hey, how come you haven't been coming out with us? How come you haven't been hitting the clubs on Saturday nights? I said, well, I've just been going to church on Sunday morning. I don't like to go with a hangover. And they're like, you're a church boy? And I was like, yo, you want to go outside? We could settle this. We could fist it up. And they were like, no, it's good. Well, that little conversation led to another one. Another one of my friends was getting married. And he was already a baptized Christian, but the woman he was marrying, she was Catholic. And he wanted to look into the Catholic faith. So he asked me if I would take him to meet the director of religious education at my parish. I said, sure, come on. So I take him. Now, I hadn't been going to church much, but I had been going, so I knew who the woman was, only because on a previous Sunday she had got up and she was looking for a new fourth grade religious ed teacher. So we get into the office, and I'm trying to show off that, yeah, I'm Catholic, right? And I was like, hey, did you get that fourth grade religious teacher? And she's like, oh, do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, no. And she's like, no, you should do it. I was like, no, I'm good. She's like, no, really, you should do it. I was like, no, back off. She's like, no, you should do this. And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is wrong with this woman? She's like, come on, do it. And I was like, no. I said, look, lady, you don't know me. You know nothing about me. I could be like some kind of serial killer. I could chop these kids up. And she looked at me, she was like, you want to teach 8th grade? I guess it's one of those things, nobody likes 8th graders. Sorry if you're in 8th grade, but it's just a fact. So I said, look, I said, I just started coming back to church. I don't know enough about the faith to teach it. And she said, that's no problem. She said, look, all I need is a young man in the classroom. Just sharpen pencils and be there for the kids. They don't see any young men in the classroom. I said, all right, a model, I can do that. I got the looks to be a model, all right? So I said, yeah, sure, I could do that. I said, I don't have to answer any questions. She said, no, nobody will be asking you any questions. You don't have to teach. You're good. I said, all right, good, we're good. So I show up for the first day of class, and guess what happens? All the kids start asking me questions, and I'm like, I don't know. God? Jesus? Right? So I looked like a total moron. I don't like looking like a moron. I like to know my stuff, right? So I go to the one place where I know I could get all the answers. You got to remember, this is before the internet. I went to my mom. And I go to my mom, and now I have to tell you a little bit about my mom. My mom's a crazy Portuguese Catholic woman. My whole life, she was like, you're going to be a priest. I'm like, Ma, I ain't going to be a priest. You're going to be a priest. Ma, I ain't going to be a priest. You're going to be a priest. Ma, you know what I did last night? I ain't going to be a priest. So I finally go to my mom, and I'm like, Mom, I need to tell you something. She's like, okay. I was like, I started going to church again. I was like, oh, I know. I'm thinking to myself, how do you know? I made sure I wasn't going to the same church you were going to. I was like, all right. I said, and Ma, I started helping out teaching religious ed in 8th graders. She's like, oh, I know. I'm thinking to myself, how does my mom know this? And so I said, Ma, these kids are asking me questions. I don't know nothing. And she goes, oh, I know. Right? My mom knew I was an idiot, right? So I said, Ma, you got anything to help me out? My mom gave me two things. She gave me a set of rosary beads, and she gave me a book by Scott Hahn. I don't know if you've ever read any of his books. I highly recommend them. They teach the Catholic faith really, really well, and he puts the faith in a simple way where it's easy to understand. So I went and I started studying, and I started finding other books and everything else, and I started to understand the faith a little bit more, and I started to come back into the church. Things were going well, and I still had one big hang-up, and that was confession. See, I thought confession was this thing that some pope had started like around the year 500, 600, maybe a little later. I was thinking, he saw people with a lot of money, and if he knew what they were doing, they'd have to give him some money, and then he could build all these nice churches. That's what my stupid mind was thinking. And I was thinking that's still what it was. And so my friend, who was Christian, who was marrying the Catholic girl, had to do his first confession before he got confirmation. And so he calls me up and he says, hey, what are you doing Wednesday night? I was like, why? He says, I got to go to confession. You want to go? And I was like, no. And he's like, no, why not? He's like, I got something to do. He's like, what are you doing? I was like, something. He's like, what are you doing? We're best friends. We always do everything together. I was like, anything but going to confession. He's like, come on, man, just come with me. So I went with him, and this is when it kind of all clicked. See, I was standing in line for confession, talking to my friend. This is not something that you're supposed to do. You're never supposed to talk in line for confession. You're supposed to be thinking about your sins, the ways that you've offended God. So I'm in line talking to my friend, and we're standing kind of like this. This is me, this is him, this is the confession over here, right? And so as we're talking, he starts going like this, and then all of a sudden I'm the next guy in line for confession, and I was like, hey, that's the trick I do in the cafeteria to get the last piece of pizza. What are you doing to me? All right? As soon as I realize what's happening, the door for the confessional opens up. This little old lady comes out. She's like, oh, come on in, it's your turn. And I was like, oh, no. And so I look, and I start walking slowly. My whole life went into slow motion. And I get to the confessional, and I literally have one foot in the door and one foot out. When my friend says, oh, there's nobody with that priest over there, I'm going over there. And I'm thinking, oh, great, I could get out of this. I don't have to go in. And I hear a voice from inside the confessional, come on in. And I was like, oh, no. So everything went in slow motion. I mean, it was like the movie The Matrix. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Bullets could come, and I could have ducked them. The priest, if he would have thrown a blessing, I could have ducked that, right? It was nerve-wracking. And my friend says, hey, I see a priest over there, I'm going. And so I'm in, one foot out. And I realize, like, this is it. And so I go ahead and I make that final commitment. I go in, and I look. Down on the ground, there's a kneeler, and there's a seat. And I have a flashback to my first ever confession. See, I was in line for confession behind two girls, and one of them at least took the kneeler, and I know that because I took the kneeler as well, and I knelt in a puddle. She must have been pretty nervous. So I knew that was an old lady that went last, so I'm not kneeling. I'm going to go sit down. I went and I sat down. Thanks be to God, chair was dry. And I take the seat and I get it nice and close to the priest. I want to intimidate him. I'm looking in his eyes and I'm just sitting there. And I'm staring him down and he goes, "My son, would you like to go to confession?" I go, "You want to hear my confession?" He goes, "Yeah, that's what I'm here for." I was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense, right? And so I start confessing my sins. And as I confess my sins, I remember saying, "I hate my father." I had blamed my father for everything that went wrong in my life. For his alcoholism. For him slapping us when we were kids. I blamed him for everything that happened to my brother, everything that happened in all of our family's life. I said, I hate him. And at that moment, as I'm looking at this priest, I start crying. And although I still see this priest in front of me, I see clear as the light of day the image of divine mercy over this priest. And I wasn't familiar with this image, but I knew it was Jesus. And the priest had started to cry as well. But I knew that it was Jesus answering the prayer from when my brother had died. If you exist, God, prove it to me. That was the prayer I prayed after my brother died. It was my first real honest prayer after go ahead and take him. It was, God, if you exist, prove it to me now or I'm done with you. And I started going back to church. And now, years later, there was Jesus. And he said, I'm real. And I exist in mercy. I came out of that confessional truly a different man. I felt like 1,000,000 pounds had been dropped off me. I know it doesn't look that way, but that's how it felt. 1,000,000 pounds had been dropped off. My eyes were buggy red from crying. My buddy, he looks over at me. He's like, "Dude, what did you do?" And I was like, "Bro, I can't even talk about it right now," right? When I went back to church, I went with a new life. It was like new breath had been breathed into me. And I started really, truly entering in to the liturgy. I remember at one point at Mass, we were praying the creed. You know the prayer, right? We pray it every single Sunday at Mass, on holy days. We got to the point in the Mass, in that creed, where it says, I believe in one holy, Catholic, apostolic church. And I thought to myself, there's things that I've been fighting, especially with contraceptives, other teachings of the church. And I remember at that moment, there was a particular grace God gave me and said, this church has been here 2,000 years. At this point, you've been around about 25. Who do you think has more wisdom? And I just realized the church is right. The church is mercy, the church is love. It's not doing things to block us, but it's actually giving us the tools to greater freedom. And so, as all this was taking place, my life was going good, I was asked something by my pastor. I was asked to go on a retreat as a chaperone. And I went on this retreat, and I'm there as a chaperone, and it was a real kind of charismatic retreat. And there was a Eucharistic procession. And during this Eucharistic procession, Jesus is coming by, and I'm thinking to myself, all right, Lord, I know what you want. I'm going to go be a missionary. I'm going to move to Africa. I'm going to marry an African queen. I'm going to make 1,000,000 babies, and life is going to be so good, and I'm going to get a pet lion, and everything is going to be great, right? That was my plan for God's plan for me, right? So Jesus is walking by, Eucharist out, and my interior voice I hear clear as a bell, if you wish to be perfect, sell all that you own and come follow me. All I could think of was the priesthood. And Jesus is walking by, and everybody around me is like, yes, Lord, yes, yes, praise you, God, yes. And I go, no, no, as everybody's staring at me. I said, God, please just send me a good Catholic girl. And I'll make you 50 priests, I'll make you 80 nuns, I'll make you a few deacons, whatever you need, I got you. But just don't call me to the priesthood. I left that retreat 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later, I meet a good Catholic girl. She's beautiful. Things are going well. We're dating. Things are really, I'm like, oh yeah, this is good. She's going to be the one. This is it. She's beautiful. Everything's perfect. And so I asked her, I said, hey, after college, did you come right back here? Did you do any travel? She goes, oh no, after college. Actually, I joined the sisters in New York. I was like, whoa. What you talking about? You joined the sisters in New York? What are you talking about? She's like, yeah, I became a nun for a little bit. I never made vows or anything like that. And I was like, okay, I don't know about this, but all right. And then I would tease her about it, and I would be like, yo, what was it like being a sister, being a nun? What was that like, And she was like, oh, we did things with the brothers, and, we would go and pray out in front of abortion clinics with the brothers, and we would do the youth program with the brothers, and we were. And I was like, well, why are you calling them brothers and you're not calling them priests? Why aren't you calling them fathers? She said, well, in this community, there's a lot of brothers. There's priests as well, but there's a lot of brothers. I was like, that's interesting. See, I didn't know anything about religious brothers in my life. And so I kept on dating her, and I finally met her family. And I'm thinking to myself, I like this girl, but this thing about religious brothers, this is cool too. So I meet her family, and the next day I asked her, I said, hey, what'd your parents think? And she's like, oh, they really liked you. I was like, yeah, I knew they would, right? And she goes, but my mom says it's not going to work out. And I was like, what you talking about, Willis? Right? So I said, no, come on, seriously, what do you mean? Why would your mom say that? She goes, my mom says you're going to go up to New York and become a brother. And I was like, that's funny. I would never think of that. In the meantime, this is all that's been going on in my head. But I keep dating her. And I'm dating her, and I'm looking for engagement rings. This is how serious this is. And I can't sleep at night. I knew what God was calling me to. So our next date, I told her. I said, I got to call this off. I got to go to New York. I got to go look into these brothers. And she cried. And who wouldn't? If I break up with you, it's pretty much downhill after that. You're not going to get better than this, right? Come on, right? So I break up with her. Next week, I go into adoration. I'm praying before the Blessed Sacrament. And as I leave, about 5 pews behind me, there she is, praying. She calls me over, crying, tears just coming down. And she hands me the information to get in touch with the friars. I thank her. I walk out. I held the door for this guy coming in. Today, I've been a friar 17 years. She's been married to that guy for 17 years. God knows what he's doing. He'll out-romance any one of us. God heals all wounds. God is perfect. God is love. God heals relationships. I said, I hate my father in confession. Today, my dad's my best friend. God is love. Allow him into your lives. Allow him to perfect your lives. Allow his mercy to always be present. Amen. May God bless you guys. Thank you so much.